here. Thank you so much for that introduction. Just thrilled to be invited to talk at this conference. I'm learning a lot about your work here. It's very exciting. This is my second time in Seoul, actually. It's a wonderful city with some great food. We already have some good food in Seoul. So I'm really excited to be here. As you know, I do research on happiness. So my name, by the way, is pronounced Sonja Lyubomirsky. You see I have a little guide over there for you for how to pronounce it. It means love and peace in Russian. So I think it's an appropriate name for someone who studies happiness. So today I'll be talking about my research on happiness. And that research, this is research that I've done with my collaborators, including two from here, from Seoul National University, that I'll be talking to you today. So most of the work that I'll be talking about is described in my book, The How of Happiness. And you see on the right is the Korean translation. So I'm a scientist who does research on happiness, why people are happy, and how people can become happier. I hope that you will find this work interesting and useful for your clients, as well as in your personal lives. I can't promise that I will make you all happier, but I promise that I will arm you with a great deal of information today. So starting with a little story. During World War II, aviation experts spent a lot of time, a lot of energy and resources studying airplanes that went down. And one day somebody asked, why don't we study the planes that stay up in the air? And I think it's a really good metaphor for the work that I do, that my colleagues and I do in the field of positive psychology, or we also call it well-being science. We study why happy people are happy, why healthy people are healthy, and why successful people are successful. And I believe that all of us want to be happy. We don't necessarily describe that wish in the same way. We might follow that pursuit of happiness differently, but in a sense, everything that we do in our lives is aimed at becoming happier. And throughout history, actually, all over the world, people have been very interested, maybe even preoccupied with the idea of happiness. So I've been collecting quotes all my life since about age 10, so I'll show you some of these quotes. So here's one from Aristotle, who 2,000 years ago wrote that happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, that whole aim and end of human existence. And here's from the Dalai Lama, the purpose of our lives is to be happy. Okay, my French is a little rusty. Il n'y a pas de honte après le bonheur. There's no shame in preferring happiness. Surveys have actually found in the United States that most Americans think about happiness at least once a day. But other countries are also interested in happiness. But you might imagine that there might be cultural differences, right? In certain cultures, in fact, there's some theories suggesting that in Asian cultures, like in Korea and in China and in Japan and other Asian cultures, that there's not as much of a preoccupation with happiness. It might be seen as a little bit selfish or, kind of egocentric to be so focused on your own well-being. And so those are interesting questions. And researchers go around the world and they ask people, how important is happiness to you? So let me show you some data from this research. So just as an example, I'm going to show you some data from the United States, Greece, Germany, South Korea, China, and Argentina. So this is a question, how important is happiness to you on a scale of 1 to 7, where 7 is as important as possible. It's very important. So you see in America, people rate happiness as very important, somewhere between like 6.5, so between 6 and 7. Now here's what the other countries say. So you see all over the world, in all of these countries, people rate happiness as very important. You'll see actually that South Korea is about the same as the US and Argentina and Greece. People in Germany and China actually rate happiness as a little bit less important, about a 6, but it's still very, very important. which is significantly less than the other countries. So these data show that all over the world, people say that it's important to be happy. And even in countries like, I was born in Russia. I came to the US when I was 10 years old. And in Russia, people talk about how it's important to suffer. That suffering is important because it builds character and it helps you gain salvation in the next life. But even in Russia, when you ask parents, what do you want most for your children? They'll say, I want my children to be happy. So, it depends how you ask the question. And so, anyways, happiness is an important goal, but is it a worthwhile goal? I mean, are happy people just kind of selfish and self-centered, or does happiness bring good things to you? And so, to answer this question, two of my colleagues and I wrote a paper, and we did what's called a meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is basically an analysis of many, many studies. In this paper, we looked at 225 studies on happiness to see what we find. And so we found, for example, that happy people are more productive at work, and they're more creative. Happy people make more money and have better jobs. Now, of course, the causal direction goes both ways, right? So having money makes people happy. But if you're happy, you're more likely to make more money. Happy people are also better leaders and negotiators. And they're more likely to get married and less likely to get a divorce. They have better relationships. So, for example, in one of my favorite studies, it showed that women who were happier at age 21 were more likely to get married at age 27 and had more fulfilling, better marriages at age 52, which is amazing. So many of these are longitudinal studies. They look at people over time. Happy people also have more friends, more social support, and they're healthier. Happy people have stronger immune systems. They're physically healthier, they even live longer. And contrary to sort of this idea that if you're happy, you're selfish and you're self-focused, it's actually happier people are more focused on others. It's actually when you're sad or depressed that you're focused on yourself, and that's evolutionarily adaptive to kind of when you're sad, you focus inward to try to determine what the problem is, why am I sad? But when you're happy, it essentially you have the luxury to think about other people, not just about yourself. And so happy people are actually more generous, more philanthropic than unhappy people. And happy people are also more resilient. They bounce back after adversity or stress. So let me pause here for a second to talk about how we define happiness. And researchers define happiness in a particular way. Basically, that happiness has two components. And the first component of happiness is the experience of positive emotions. So people who are happy are more likely to experience frequent positive emotions like joy, pride, curiosity, tranquility, affection, interest. Of course, they don't experience positive emotions all the time, but they experience them frequently. But that's not enough. So the second component of happiness is the sense that my life is good, that I'm satisfied with my life, and that I'm progressing towards my goals in sort of a satisfactory way. So two components, an emotional component, I feel good much of the time, and also what's called a cognitive, kind of a thinking component, that I judge my life to be a good life. Happiness is very subjective. No one else really knows how happy you are. So I can ask your husband or your friend, how happy are you? And they probably would have a good idea, but they might get it wrong, right? Some people act cheerful outside, on the outside, right? But they're kind of unhappy inside. So it's a very subjective thing. And so we ask people, in our studies, we ask people, how happy are you? Relative to other people, how happy are you? Are you satisfied with your life? How often do you experience joy? How often do you experience a sense of calm or peace, etc.? So we ask people their subjective judgments to measure their happiness. And so I'm going to just talk spend a little more time, a few minutes, talking about some of these particular studies studies because they're so interesting and important. So I'm going to spend some time talking about happiness at work and happiness in health. So when you think about health, physical health is obviously very important. There are many longitudinal studies in this area. Okay, so longitudinal studies, what they do is they measure people's happiness at time 1, and then they wait, and then they measure people's health. So for example, if I were going to do a project, a research study, with everyone sitting in this audience, I would give you all a questionnaire and ask you how happy are you right now, this year, and maybe in 3 years, or in 10 years, or in 30 years, I find you again. And then I ask you, are you healthy? Are you still alive? Obviously, have you had a heart attack, a stroke? Do you have diabetes? How often do you get a cold or a flu? Do you have any pain? And so the idea is we use happiness at time 1 to predict health at time 2. So there are a lot of studies in this area. And what the studies find is that people who are happy at one point in time, if you're happy today, you're going to have a lower incidence of stroke 6 years later, and you have a lower incidence of coronary heart disease or ischemic heart disease 10 to 15 years later. So happier people have less heart disease many years later. If you have heart disease, you're more likely to survive it up to 11 years later. If you have lung cancer, which is of course a much more deadly illness, you're more likely to survive it 3 years later if you're happier. You're less likely to be receiving sort of disability pension if you're happy. And this is an interesting one. Happier people are less likely to die in a car accident up to 8 years later. So maybe they have less road rage. Do you have road rage here? Yeah, everywhere. And I had some experience of the famous traffic in Seoul yesterday, where it took us a long time to get from the airport. So maybe happier people are less anxious, maybe they pay attention when they're driving, maybe they're more likely to wear a seatbelt, etc. So happier people are less likely to die in a car accident. And happier people are less likely to die of all causes. So they're healthier, they live longer. Here's another way to do the study. This is one of my favorite studies, where they looked at cold viruses. So that picture over there is a picture of the rhinovirus, which is the cold virus. And so in this study, what researchers did is they had healthy volunteers, they completed a measure of happiness, and then they all were given the cold virus directly into their nasal passage. They injected the rhinovirus. It's kind of like, when you travel in an airplane, there are all these cold viruses, but some people get sick when they travel on airplanes, and other people don't. So the question, kind of like in the study, if everyone was exposed to the rhinovirus, who gets sick? Who's going to get sick? And so what they did is they gave everyone the cold virus, and then they quarantined the participants in a hotel, and they monitored them for 5 days, and they measured, are they sick? Are they coughing? Do they have, do they have a temperature? Do they have a runny nose? And then they monitored them for 1 month. And what they found is that the happier volunteers were less likely to get a cold once they had the cold virus in their system. And even when they got a cold, it was shorter. It didn't last for as many days, which is a really cool finding. And it turned out this finding was independent of people's age or ethnicity or body mass index, things like that. So if it wasn't the case, that happier people, say, happen to be thinner or younger, and that's why they were less likely to get a cold. So they controlled for those factors. Other studies have shown the same thing. Another study looked at people who were getting a vaccination, an immunization shot for hepatitis B, and they found that happier people who got the hepatitis B vaccination showed a stronger immunoprotective response. So they showed a healthier response to the vaccination than people who are less happy. These studies collectively suggest that happier people have stronger immune systems. Right? So their immune function is stronger. Okay? So let's talk about work now. Is happiness important in the workplace as you go about doing your job? It absolutely is. And so lots of studies in this area. I'll tell you about one. Here's a study where people, the researchers went to a government agency and they looked and they measured how happy employees were at this government agency. These were mostly men, average 45 years old. On average, they had been at the job about 17 years. And then 3.5 years later, the researchers came back and they asked the department managers to rate these employees overall. How good a worker are they? And also, do they offer useful ideas? Do they have high goals for their performance? Do they listen to you when you give them instructions? Do they work interdependently well as a team with others? And what they found was the happier employees, and remember, happiness was measured 3.5 years earlier, the happier employees were rated as superior, as better on all of these dimensions. So the managers thought that happy employees were better workers. Okay, so that's interesting. But these are all correlational studies. So for example, it's possible that the managers, they see you're happy and they think you're a better worker. It's called the halo effect. They think you're a better worker even when you're not, right? Now that's still an important finding, but it's possible. So some studies try to get at sort of the causality. And so some researchers try to do experiments where they experimentally induce happiness, manipulate happiness in the laboratory. So if you went into a study and you wanted to make people happy for 10 minutes or for 30 minutes, how would you do it? So you could give them a gift. You could tell them they scored very well on some kind of test. You know, there's various ways to do it. You can have it. You can show them a movie clip. That's a very happy movie clip. You can play happy music. Sometimes music that can have a powerful effect on the mood. So in this particular study, the subjects, the participants, were all doctors. They were all internists. They were all doctors. And to induce a happy mood, researchers gave them chocolate. Okay? Chocolate and candy. And so half the people, half the participants, they gave them this gift of chocolate. And it came in a cellophane package. So they gave them the gift of chocolate, but they didn't allow them to eat it right away. Okay, it was just this gift. And the reason was they didn't want sort of the physiological effects of actually eating the chocolate to affect the study. So they could eat it later. And then the control group didn't get a gift. Okay? Now, there were some subjects that were excluded from the study. They couldn't be in the study. Can you guess who they were? Diabetics. Right? You couldn't have diabetics. So there's one more. Dieters. So people who are on a diet couldn't be in the study, right? You understand why? If you're on a diet and you get a gift of chocolate, it's not going to make you happy, right? It might make you unhappy. So no dieters in the study. So they gave everyone chocolate or they didn't get anything. And then they measured their creativity. So the researchers wanted to see if you are in a happy mood, does it make you more creative? And there are different ways to measure creativity. In this study, they gave people a test. And there was lots of items in this test. And one of the items, and each of the items, each of the questions is 3 words. And you have to find a 4th word that goes together with these 3 words. It's not easy to do, okay? So there's a word, and it's hard to do if your English isn't your first language. You have to find a word that you can combine with each of these 3 words to form a new word. Now I'm going to tell you the answers and it'll become obvious to you. The answer to this is night. So it's nightclub, nightgown, nightmare. See that? And so that's the answer. So there's many items like this. And the faster you do it, and the more items you get right, the more creative you are, the more sort of flexible is your thinking. And so the researchers found that the doctors in this study who were put in a happy mood because they got some chocolate, they did better on this test. They were more creative. And I think it's a really, really important finding. It suggests that even temporary moods, so even when you feel happy for a few minutes, that can be important. Because you might feel happy for 10 minutes and you get a good idea at work, and then that makes you even happier. And other research shows that when you're positive moods or positive emotions, even when they're transient, even when they're short-lived, can have durable and long-lasting and important consequences. So you're happy for a minute, you might smile, and someone might approach you, you might make a new friend, or you might go home and do something nice for your family, and then they might have a better relationship with you, which makes you even happier. And then you go back to work, and then you're even happier at work. So this is what researchers call an upward spiral, right? So things, you know what a downward spiral is, right? When things go down and down. This is the opposite. It's called an upward spiral. It can be triggered by feeling happy, even when it's because you get a gift of chocolate. Now, I'm not saying you should all have chocolate all the time to be happy, but there's different ways that you can induce it positively. Okay, so we were just talking about how happy people are healthier, and they're more creative, and they're more productive at work. But we're also interested in this idea that happier people have more friends, and they're also more helpful. So my laboratory, my students, were interested in the question of, can you twist this around? So if you ask people to be more helpful, would they make more friends? Would they get happier? So we did a study where we went to the beautiful city of Vancouver, Canada, and this was a study we did with kids. Now, most of my studies are with adults, but this was with kids who were from around ages 9 to 11 years old. They were in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So we went to 19 different classrooms in the Vancouver School District. And what we did was very easy. Half of the classroom, we asked the kids to do acts of kindness. Okay, so to do something nice for someone in their life for 4 weeks. And each week they had to do 3 acts of kindness. And the other half of the kids, we asked them to go to 3 places each week and write down where they went. So they also were active, they did something, but it wasn't acts of kindness. So here's an example. This is a kid, this is a girl who was in the acts of kindness group, so we asked her, what did you do this week? And it's a little hard to read, but what she wrote was, she vacuumed the floor, which is nice. She cleaned the dining table, and this is my favorite, hugging my mom when she's stressed by her job. So, well, interestingly, almost all the acts of kindness were done at home. So these kids, they went back home and they helped their parents, they helped their sister, their siblings, their dog. So here's an example of someone in the control group, the neutral group, what 3 places they go to that week, and this person wrote they went to Richmond Shopping Center, okay, some kind of mall. They went to track, so they went running on a track, and they also went swimming in Hillcrest instead. So they went to 3 different places. So what we found was the kids who did acts of kindness got happier, okay, which is not surprising, and I'll show you more data. When you help others, you feel happier. But not only did they get happier, they became more popular with their classmates. So here's the data. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, this is how we measured what's called peer acceptance or popularity. In every classroom, we asked people to give us names of kids who they wanted to play with. Okay, so like in your classroom, say 30 kids, give me a name of, say, 8 kids or 5 kids that you want to play with more, that you want to be friends with. And then we counted how many nominations every kid got. And so this graph shows changes in peer acceptance, in the number of nominations for friendship that people got before and after the study. So the kids who were in the kindness group, they actually made more friends after the study than the kids who were in the control group, which we call the whereabouts group. And we think this is so interesting, especially since the acts of kindness that the kids did were mostly done at home. And so something happened, you go and you help your family, and you come back to the classroom the next day, maybe you're happier, you're more confident, you're more positive, but something shows, and those kids, the other kids want to play with you, you know. So we think it's really cool. So a study showing that doing acts of kindness for others can actually make you more likable and help you make friends. Okay, so we've been talking about how happiness is very popular for most people in the world. They have to be happy. We've been talking about how happiness is a good thing, right? When you're happy, good things come to you. You make friends, you make more money, you're more likely to get married, you have a better immune system. But a lot of us have the wrong idea about what makes us happy. And we have the wrong idea about what we think will make us terribly unhappy. And so I wrote a book called The Myths of Happiness. This is the Korean version. Where I talk about sort of what I call these happiness myths. So this idea about the happiness myths is that many of us think, well, I'm not happy today, but I'll be happy later. When I get married, I'll be happy, right? When I have kids, then I'll be happy. When I have a lot of money, then I'll be happy. We also feel like, well, I can never be happy if I get divorced, or I never get married. I don't have much money. When my dreams don't come true, when I get older, a lot of people think that when they're older, they dread getting older because they think they'll be unhappy. I don't know if you know this, but do you know which group, if you look at age over the lifespan, who do you think is the unhappiest age group? The unhappiest? Teenagers, right? Teenagers or 20s. So we think those are the people, we wish we were 20 years old. No, they're the unhappiest people. And who are the happiest? They're older people. So over 60, 65, the peak is around 65, 67. And then unfortunately, it kind of goes down after that. So older people are actually happier, but we think, oh, I don't want to be old, I'm going to be unhappy when I'm old. Actually, it's the other way around. People get happier as they get older. So these are all happiness myths. So let me start with one, and that's about divorce. And divorce is very difficult, and it makes people very unhappy. But let's look what the data show. So there are some big studies out there that follow people over time, and every year they ask them, how happy are you? And so this is these are thousands of people, and all of these data I'm going to show you are for women, but the data for men are almost identical. So here are people and how happy they were starting 4 years before they got a divorce. Now, 4 years before they got a divorce, they probably didn't know they were going to get a divorce because they can't see the future. Year zero, do you see year zero? That's the year of the divorce, the year of the event. So you see that's their happiness level. And so it's about stable, but you see how 2 years, whenever you see an asterisk like this, that means that your happiness level is significantly below or above your baseline. So you see how 2 years before the divorce, people are at their lowest level. Does that make sense? Kind of like 2 years before, that's when you're like the most unhappy. And they get a divorce. Now what happens after the divorce? They're still unhappy, but then 4 years afterwards, and 5 years afterwards, they're much happier than they used to be. Now, I have a friend who went through this horrible, horrible divorce with like child custody fights and everything. And I sent her this graph. And she emailed me and she said, I look at that graph every day. Kind of to remind her it'll take 4 or 5 years. Now, of course, it's an average. It's an average, so not everyone is going to feel the same way. But on average, 4 to 5 years later, people will recover from a divorce. So this research suggests that people are very resilient, right? So we think, oh, if I got divorced, I'd be so unhappy. And you would be very unhappy, but it wouldn't last forever. So here's research on layoffs from a job. So this is 4 years to 5 years after you got laid off. So year zero is the year you got laid off, you lost your job. You see that 1 year, -1 and 0. So 1 year before the layoff, and 0 the year of the layoff, you're much less happy than you were before. And then about 3-4 years later, you're back to being happier. So it also takes a long time to recover from losing your job. Here's bereavement when you lose your spouse, and these effects are much more strong, much more severe. You see here, 1 year before people lose a spouse, they're very unhappy. The year they lose your husband or wife, you're very unhappy. The year later, you're still very unhappy. It takes 5 years before people go back to the base, or even higher than their baseline. So they do recover on average. Again, not everyone does, but on average, people recover from the loss of a spouse. In terms of their happiness, in terms of their sort of overall happiness. So the take-home point of all this research is that people are remarkably resilient. So almost nothing is as misery-inducing as we think it is, right? We think, oh, I would be unhappy forever if I lost my spouse, or I got divorced, or I lost my job. But it turns out that people bounce back, they're very resilient. And people who are facing adversities or traumas or stresses actually find there's a lot of positive things that happen in their lives. And so there's a study that was done on women who were survivors of breast cancer. And so these are all women cancer survivors. And 2/3 of them said that the cancer led to positive changes in their lives. I mean, they don't want to have the cancer, but now that they have it, 2/3 said that there were positive changes in their lives. So these are the kinds of things that they said. The negative events or adversities lead people to have a renewed appreciation of their life. And often it's a wake-up call, kind of like, it sort of tells you, it gives you a perspective about your life. Maybe it tells you, I'm going to change my job, or I want to move somewhere else. You realize what your true priorities are. You realize who your true friends are, right? When you have adversity. And also, it makes people recognize that they have strengths that they maybe didn't even know they had. And so maybe it's courage or humility or just the ability to get through the day and make it work and take care of your kids even after you've been through a traumatic experience. So people, on average, people are very resilient and are able to bounce back from adversities. So this is kind of like what I'm going through, like the different happiness myths that we think we would never be happy again if we got a divorce or lost our spouse or lost our job, and that's not true. So now I'm going to talk about the happiness side of the myth. So there's sort of a dark side to this resilience. So this ability to get used to almost everything that happens to us is sort of this dark side. So there's something called hedonic adaptation, which means that we get used to almost anything that happens to us. But that's a good thing when it's a negative problem, it's a problem. But when it's a positive thing, we get used to positive things as well. This is called hedonic adaptation. So you move into a nicer house, right? At first it's really nice to have this nicer house or apartment, and then you get used to it, right? And then you want an even nicer house. Well, one example of my own life is I had LASIK surgery, because I couldn't see very well. Anyone here ever had LASIK? Yeah? And it's miraculous, right? Like one day you can't see anything, and then it's like a 30-second procedure, and then you open your eyes and you have 20/20 vision. And so I hated having glasses, I hated contact lenses. And so when I had the LASIK, I was so happy. But how long do you think it took me to completely get used to my new perfect vision and to take it for granted? I think about 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks, I already was taking it for granted. So this happens almost all the time. Good things happen to us at first, it makes us happy, but then we just adapt. We get used to it, we take it for granted. And so studies, there's research on this. So one of my favorite is about getting married. Okay? When people get married, it makes them happier. So here's the research, 4 years before the wedding to 5 years after. You see how 1 year before people get married, they're already happier than they were before. Does that make sense, right? Maybe they just got engaged, they're really excited. The year of the wedding, they're happier. Okay, how long do you think the boost for marriage lasts? How long? Someone said like 20 years? That's very optimistic. Okay, I'll tell you how long it lasts. It lasts for 2 years. And you look at 5 years later. Actually, what do you think is happening in a 2-year period? Why is it 2 years? Children. Okay, we'll get to that. So even to religion, again, this is an average. Some people, when they get married, they go up in their happiness and they stay up forever, for many, many years. And so those are the interesting things we want to study to see what it is that they're doing that maintains their happiness. So again, the take There's no magic formula for happiness and no sure course for misery. We need to understand that when there's a turning point in life, we get married, we get divorced, we lose our job, we get sick, that these turning points are not necessarily major crises, that they often, we recover from them. And so when you're less excited with your job, or with your car, or with your marriage, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, or there's something wrong with your marriage. It's just a natural phenomenon that happens to all of us. Now, failing to understand these happiness myths may make us feel there's something wrong with us. We might leave our husband because we think, oh, it's not as exciting as it used to be, sort of not realizing that this is a natural phenomenon. We might stay in a bad relationship because we think, oh, I'd be so unhappy if I were single. So how do you maintain, how do you not adapt to your house or your job or your marriage? And it's actually hard to do, but one key is appreciation, is to really appreciate and be grateful for what you have. To have variety and novelty in your life. So we adapt to things that aren't changing. So when we do different things, say with our partner, when it's not all the same every week, we're less likely to adapt. And to have some surprise in our lives. Surprise in our job. There's certain jobs where there's a lot of variety and there's surprises, right? Those are exciting jobs. There's some jobs where you do the same thing every day. Those are the jobs that are not as exciting. So I'm going to sort of end this part of the talk by telling you about what happens when you have children. Now I should add that I have 4 children myself. And the youngest is age 3. So the youngest is 3. And then I have a girl who's 3, I have a girl who's 5. I have a boy who's almost 15. And a girl who's 17, so they're very far apart. And this one, by the way, that's one of my kids. That's the 5-year-old, a few minutes after she was born. So that's the birth of a child. So what happens to our happiness? Okay, so you see the year before we give birth, -1, we're already much happier than we used to be. Does that make sense? Maybe you're married or you want to have your first child, you're excited, and then you're happy, and then the happiness goes down. Especially if you're 2 or 3. Now, I think what's happening there, see, 1 child is not that hard, right? It's 2 that's hard. I think people are having their second child at year 2 or 3. That's what we're even less happy. So people often ask me, well, are parents happier than people who don't have kids? Because there's a lot in the U.S. There's a lot of newspaper articles, magazine articles, talking about how parents are miserable. Right, and then you don't want to have kids because you're going to make me unhappy. And I thought that didn't seem right. And so my students and I did a big paper studying this question. And this is what we found. We found that parents are happier than people who don't have children, but only in certain situations. It depends. So if you're middle-aged or old and you have kids, you're happier than your friends who are also middle-aged or old and who don't have kids. So it's better when you're older. When you have kids who are in middle childhood or grown, you're happier. So this just means that people who have little kids are not that happy as parents, right? Because it's hard. It's hard to have little kids, babies and little children. If you're married with children, you're happier than people who are married without children. But single parents aren't as happy as single people who don't have kids. Now this is kind of the bad news for a lot of people here. The big effect is with fathers. So fathers are happier than men without children. But mothers are about the same in happiness as women who don't have children. Now we think it's because mothers tend to do more of the hard work of caring for children, but we're not sure. Right? Fathers get a big benefit. If your children live with you, you're happier. So like if you're divorced, and your spouse is custody, then you're not as happy, which is not surprising. If your children are biological or adopted, you tend to be happier. If you have stepchildren, people tend not to be as happy. And this is kind of a stupid one, but it's true. If your children have a lot of problems, you're not going to be as happy as a parent, obviously. But what's interesting is, in all of these studies, even if your children have problems, Parents report having more meaning in their life than people who don't have children. So they don't always report being happier, but they report having more meaning. So there you go. Okay, so we've been talking about how we have some wrong ideas, some misconceptions about what will make us happy or unhappy. So how do we stay happy after we get married, and after we have children, and we lose our job, or we get sick? How do we maintain our happiness? Can we become happier? If we put enough effort into it, can we all become happier? So there's a lot of books in bookstores or Amazon or whatever, and you read books online about happiness. And I'm going to give you some examples. So here's one title. These are all bestsellers. Happiness is free, and it's easier than you think. Now, interestingly, that's like the opposite of what I find in my work, that happiness is harder than you think. But you can't sell a book that's called Happiness is Harder Than You Think, right? People want to think it's easy. You can be happy no matter what, happy for no reason. My favorite is you can be the wife of a happy husband. I'm joking about that, but so there's a lot of literature out there about how to be happy, but is there any research support for people really become happier? And so actually there's 3 reasons that scientists have been pessimistic about whether people can actually become happier. And one reason, and that's my 5-year-old, is that there's research that suggests that we're all born. Yes, sorry.
I recommend one book called Choice You.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So research suggests that there's a genetic component to happiness. When you look around us, some people are just naturally happier than others. They don't have to try very hard, and some people are not as happy. And when we have children, those of you who have more than one child, we know that you think we raise them the same, and some of your kids are just naturally happier than others. So I have, as I said, I have 4 children. Some of them are not as happy as others, right? Some of them are just happier than others. So if it's true that there's a genetic component to happiness, maybe that limits sort of how happy we can become. Another source of pessimism is that happiness is part of our personality. It's a trait. And so we know that personality doesn't change very much over time. And so if happiness is part of our personality, and personality is very stable across the life course, then maybe it's hard for us to change our happiness. And finally, we've already been talking about hedonic adaptation, this idea that we adapt to almost everything in our lives that's positive. So if we adapt to almost every good thing that ever happens to us, then how can we become happier? Right? That's sort of the question. So I wouldn't be here today talking to you if I didn't think that there were reasons to be optimistic, right? And I personally do think that people can become happier when they put enough effort into it. So that's what I'm talking about today. So that's the myths of happiness. Okay, so our argument is that despite the finding that our happiness is partially genetically determined, and despite the finding that our life situations, how much money we make, how beautiful we are, or where we live, or whether we're married, those things have a smaller influence on our happiness than we think they should. Still, a very large portion of happiness, I say that it's up to 40%, is in our power to change. And this is the cover of my book, The How of Happiness, with this idea that about 50% of individual differences in happiness are influenced by genetics, that about 10% of individual differences in happiness are influenced by our life circumstances, and that leaves about 40% that has to do with our intentional activities. Now, I should warn you that these numbers are very approximate. They're just guesses, basically, and that these 3 factors all influence each other, and it depends on what kind of life you have. But the bottom line, sort of the key message of this work and of my book, The How of Happiness, is that there is something that you can do to make yourself happier by changing the ways that you behave and by changing the ways that you think every day of your life. And that's what I'm going to talk about starting now. And so these are some of the strategies that have been shown by researchers to affect happiness. So happier people are more likely to express gratitude, to forgive others, to savor the moment, to exercise, to practice their religion, to nurture their relationships. So these are all things that people can do to become happier. Now, I don't think any of you here are surprised by anything on this list, right? Because it kind of makes sense. It's sort of common sense. These are things that make you happy. So what I do in my laboratories, I actually systematically do experiments to test whether these strategies are actually effective. And so what we do, they're called happiness interventions. And an intervention is basically an experiment in which people are instructed to change themselves in some positive way. So an intervention, you know the idea of a clinical trial? It's kind of like a clinical trial. But clinical trials are used, for example, to test a new drug. Okay, so researchers might test, is this drug effective? What is the appropriate dosage of the drug? Maybe some people shouldn't take this drug, some people should. And so we tested some very similar questions. Is a particular strategy effective? So for example, is expressing gratitude, is that an effective strategy to make you happier? Is there an optimal dosage for gratitude? I'm going to talk about that in a second. Maybe you can be too grateful or too ungrateful, not grateful enough. Should certain people not express gratitude? Maybe it only works for some people and not others. So they're kind of like the clinical trials that we're doing, what we call them happiness interventions. And these are some examples of interventions that we've done where we ask people over the course of 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks to do certain kinds of happiness activities. I already told you about that study in Vancouver with children. Remember we asked them to do acts of kindness over a period of 4 weeks. So we asked them to do acts of kindness, to count their blessings, to savor happy days. We just did a study, it was actually on the Today Show in the US, where we asked people, imagine that in 1 month you're moving away to somewhere far away, and so live your life this month like it's your last month, like it's like you live in Seoul, but in a month you're going to move something to a different country, and you don't know when you're coming back. So live your life like it's your last month. And people live their life differently. They were happier, they spend more time with friends and family, they spend time doing things they really enjoy doing, etc. So these are kind of happiness interventions we do. And so the focus of my lab is actually asking these questions: how and why do these happiness enhancing strategies work? And what are the factors that underlie their effectiveness? That's what we're going to talk about. What factors kind of are the secret to the success of these happiness strategies. So for example, we did a study where we asked people to count their blessings, to write down every week what they're grateful for. This is an example of the instructions. There are many things in our lives that we're grateful about. Think back to the events of the past week. Every week you write about what you're grateful for. This is a very simple experiment. So you write about what you're grateful for, but in this case, we were interested in the optimal dosage of gratitude. So we had people do this once a week, every Sunday night, they wrote what they're grateful for, or we had people do this 3 times a week. So every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, people wrote what they're grateful for to see what was more effective. And this is what we found. If you look at change in gratitude, this is a graph that shows how much did people increase in their gratitude from before the study started to after the study, and this is a 6-week study. And so you see the control group didn't change in gratitude, and people who counted their blessings once a week, you see that they became more grateful, but people who counted their blessings 3 times a week, no change. Now look at happiness. The control group actually got less happy, and I can tell you later why if you're interested. People who counted their blessings once a week, they became more grateful, but those who did it 3 times a week, no change. And so what we believe is happening is that when you try to express gratitude 3 times a week, it's too much. Maybe it becomes a chore, and you don't want to do it. Maybe you have trouble thinking about things that you're grateful for, but once a week is perfect. At least on average. And so actually one person, when they saw this, they came up to me and they said, well, maybe it's not a coincidence that a lot of religious rituals are once a week. once a week you kind of review your life, and that's the whole factor. So we found that these are sort of a list of factors that we're studying in our lab, which are sort of the keys to your happiness. And so the one that we found some evidence for is dosage. You have to have just the right amount of gratitude or the right amount of kindness. So dosage is important. Okay, so what about fit? So some people, like, I actually don't really like counting my blessings. I find it kind of hokey and trite. And some people love it, and they do it often, they do it every day. And so I think what's important is what's called fit, which is finding the right strategy for you, for your clients. And so it can be fit with your personality, with your strengths, your culture, or with the source of your happiness. So we each have certain strategies that you might feel natural doing, we might feel we identify with, we enjoy doing. Other strategies we just don't feel natural doing. So it's important to find the right fit. So we did a study actually using an iPhone application based on my work called Live Happy. You noticed in the old iPhone, Live Happy does not exist anymore because we're working on the next generation application. So you can't get it. But it was 99 cents, so it was very popular for a while. So we actually used the users who used our application, we used them for research. So this application had like 8 different strategies that you can use on your phones. And it's really, really cool, actually. If you count your blessing, you can text or call or someone in the contact list to thank them. You can write down what your contacts and friends. My favorite, actually, is the bottom, the left-hand corner, the savoring album. Okay, the bottom left-hand corner. And so there, you take a photo with your camera of someone or something you find beautiful or that you love, or you can go to your photo album and you can find a photo there. So, for example, I once went on vacation with my daughter to Australia, and it was a really great vacation. And so I look at those photos and I write like how much I enjoyed that, and we bonded on that trip. And so anyway, so people can use any of these 8 strategies. We also ask them, do you identify with the strategy? Do you enjoy it? Does it feel natural to do it? And here's what we found. These are the 8 activities, and this is the best fit for our users. So the bigger the line, the better fit. So you see the very last line is best possible self. So on average, people said that thinking about their best possible selves in the future, this is kind of optimism, kind of activity that fit them the best. Expressing gratitude, interestingly, was one of the least fitting strategies you see on top. But it doesn't really matter, actually, what the average fit is. What matters is the fit for you, right? If you think for you expressing gratitude is an enjoyable, natural strategy you like, that's what's important. And we found in green here, the higher the fit with a particular activity, the more likely people try that activity and the more they benefited from it. So the point is that if you do something that really fits your personality and fits your values, is a good match to your strengths and weaknesses and to your culture, you're going to do it more often, you're going to put more effort into it, and it's going to make you happier. Here's another study we did. When we asked people, how motivated are you to be happier, basically? And we found the red bars, those are people who are motivated to be happy. And the green bars are people who are not motivated to be happy. And these are people who did an 8-week intervention where they tried to be grateful and they tried to be optimistic. And these are changes in happiness. And you see that if you really want to be happy, you're going to succeed, you're going to be more likely to succeed. So the red bars, if you want to be happy, if you're motivated and committed to becoming a happy person, you're going to increase in your happiness after you try to be optimistic, after you try to be grateful. But if you don't really care, if you're not so motivated, you're not going to become happier. You might even become less happy. So that's not surprising. But researchers in psychology often have to do studies that prove the obvious to show that motivation is important. So these are studies that show the importance of fit and the importance of motivation. So if you have a client and they're not motivated to become happier or less depressed or less anxious, obviously they're not going to get very much out of any of this. Okay, so what about social support? So here's a study that we did in Seoul, in Korea. We have a collaborator at Seoul National University, whose name is Inter Choi. So Dr. Choi and his students, they had participants at Seoul National University, who were all students. And then at UC Riverside, is the university where I teach in California, we had students who participated in that study. And so in this study, people did acts of kindness every week for 6 weeks, okay? So half of the students did 5 acts of kindness each week, all in one day, over the course of 6 weeks. And the other half just did their normal academic work for 6 weeks. That was the control group. So half the students completed their regular academic work. So we did this in the US and we did this in Korea. Because we want to see the differences. In this study, we're also interested in the importance of social support. So when you have a friend or your family is supportive of you, they're encouraging you, they kind of hold your hand, you're going to be more successful. So here in this study, half of the students received what's called autonomy support from their classmates. And these classmates sent them text messages to kind of say, hey, encourage them, give them perspective, kind of remind them you have a lot of choices, the way you can do this activity. And so again, the activity was doing acts of kindness for other people. And interestingly, we did not find cultural differences. So we did not find differences between the Korean, the Seoul National University students and the American students. I'm going to tell you in a few minutes a study we did also at Seoul National University where we did find a difference. So that's interesting. So here I'm going to show you the results for both cultures, both Americans and Koreans together. And so here we find that the students, these are changes in happiness from before to after the 6-week intervention. We found that the students who did acts of kindness and they had social support, they got happier. You see that? The green bar over there. Everyone else basically stayed the same in happiness. So if you did acts of kindness without support, or if you were a control group, you didn't get happier. So it really mattered that you had that support from your peers. The social support is important. You know, social support is important in every area. I'm a runner, and so in the mornings I go running, and I set the alarm clock early in the morning, and it's really hard to wake up, right? Because you don't want to wake up and go running, you just want to go back to sleep. But I have a friend that I run with, and we meet on a street corner, so in our neighborhood. And so I know if I'm not there, she's going to be very upset. And she's thinking the same thing. So having that friend, that buddy, really matters. So for my exercise routine, it really helps me to have that social support. Same thing with the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so here's the role of social support. Now here's my favorite study, also done in Korea and the United States. We had 2 samples, one from Seoul National University that Dr. Choi ran for us, and his students, and we had UC Riverside students. And in this study, it was also a 6-week study. Students did acts of kindness, and they also wrote gratitude letters. So here's what we found. These are the results for the American students. So these lines are changes in happiness across time. So if you see a bar that is increasing, that means that happiness is increasing. So you see that the American students who wrote gratitude letters for 6 weeks, you see how they got happier? That kind of blue line. And the American students who did acts of kindness, they also got happier. Now let's look at the Seoul National University students. It's really interesting. Those students who did acts of kindness, they got happier. But the students who did gratitude letters, they got less happy. So if we have time later during the Q&A, I would love to get your ideas for why you think the Korean students got less happy when we asked them to write letters of gratitude. So I'm interested. We have some ideas, but I'm very interested in your ideas. So that was an interesting cultural difference. And it shows that sometimes culture is important, plays a role in the pursuit of happiness. Okay. Finally, we looked at effort. So remember I told you it's very important to put hard work into whatever you do, whether you're trying to lose weight, or to advance in your career, or to be a happier or better person. You have to put effort into it. And so we looked at how much effort did students put into this kindness and gratitude activities. You You see, these are the American students. The red line, students who put a lot of work into it. You see how they got a lot happier? The green line, students who put a medium amount of effort into the activities, they got a little happy, right? And the last line, the gray line, students who didn't put much effort into it, they didn't get happier. So again, it makes sense. The more effort you put into something, the more it'll work out. The Korean students, it's the same pattern. It's just it's a weaker pattern because remember, the gratitude did not work for them. So, but it's still the same pattern. The more effort you put in, the happier you get. Okay. So there's the importance of effort. Okay, so the conclusion of our research is that happiness takes work, right? It's not easy. You have to put effort into it. You have to be dedicated and committed. Now, the good news is after you start trying to be more grateful or be more optimistic, then it becomes more of a habit. So it doesn't require as much effort as it did at first. So right at first it's always harder to do something, and then it becomes more usual. Like driving a car, right? I just taught my daughter to drive a car, and you sort of remember, like, it's not easy to drive a car. Like, it actually is pretty difficult, and she's really nervous, taking left turns. But then after a while, it just becomes so easy. Okay, so what's next? We are still doing lots of studies looking at how positive activities work. We ask things like, does age matter? And I'm just going to take a break. How much time do I have? Sorry, how many? 10 minutes, perfect. 20, okay. Well, we can have a discussion. Okay, so remember I already said that age, it does matter for happiness, that older people are happier. Now, these interventions seem to work very similarly in different age groups, right? So, whether you're young or old, just sitting with kids who did exercise, they get happier. There have been studies done with older people, they also get happier. So, we don't see kind of a difference in age in the pursuit of happiness. Probably the kinds of activities people do are different. So, for example, one reason that we created our iPhone application, the app, is for young people, right? Because young people don't buy self-help books. If you're like a teenager, if you're a college student, but you might use an app on your phone, and they're looking at the phone all the time. So it might be useful to do a happiness intervention on a phone. So we actually are doing that more now. What else? Can we alleviate depressive symptoms? Okay, so some of you might be interested in this with your clients. So if someone is clinically depressed, could they use some of these strategies to become less depressed and become happier? Of course, most people who are depressed, they don't want to just be not depressed, of course, they want to be happy. And so there's sort of two questions you can ask. Would depressed people benefit even more from these simple interventions that we're studying, from writing gratitude letters or doing something like this? In part because of what's called the floor effect, right? They have more room to improve. And also, presumably, if you're depressed, you're more motivated to get rid of your depression, right, to be happier. But maybe depressed people might actually benefit less from these activities. In part because if you can't get off the couch, right, you're not going to go do acts of kindness for all your friends, right? So you have certain when you're depressed, you have certain sort of cognitive and behavioral deficits that might prevent you from taking full advantage of some of these kinds of activities, and might even lead them to backfire. And so the answer to this question is, as often is in science, is that it depends. Sometimes it's yes to the first, sometimes it's yes to the second. So Marty Seligman, who many of you probably know, he has done studies with depressed people where he's given them very simple interventions. Like the most famous one is write down 3 good things that happened to you today. 3 good things that happened to you today. Very, very simple. Those 3 things can be like the sun came out today, it can be very simple. And that was very effective with severely depressed people. But we did a study with depressed college students, and we asked them to write gratitude letters, and they started getting more depressed after writing gratitude letters. So we stopped the study, and we asked them, to try to figure out what was happening. And so I actually had talked to many of who are mental health professionals, why do you think gratitude might not be effective for people who are depressed? Well, when we ask people, they say, I can't think of anything to be grateful for. It makes me feel like a failure to try to write this gratitude letter. They can't write it. They can't, or they feel guilty because they should have thanked like their parents, but they didn't. And so it makes them feel guilty, it makes them feel kind of embarrassed, it makes them feel uncomfortable, it makes them feel indebted. And so it's very interesting. And so we have to be very careful when we take these interventions and we bring them to sort of a clinical population, whether it's in people who are anxious, or have eating disorders, or addiction, or depression, and we have to sort of maybe tailor those interventions a little bit for different populations. So maybe do something like for depressed people, do something very simple, like write about 3 good things that happened to you, rather than pick a person in your life who's done a lot for you and write them a letter. Maybe that's not the most appropriate intervention. We also ask the question, sort of how much do genetics matter, genetics versus environment? And so we recently finished a study with 800 twins in the United Kingdom. These are all teenagers. And we asked them to do acts of kindness and write gratitude letters, and it worked. They got happier. But what we found was genetics didn't matter in terms of who got happier and who didn't. What mattered was what's called non-shared environment. So if you're a twin, if you're an identical twin, you share your genetics, you share your genes. And to some extent, you share your environment, right? You're the same family, you go to the same school. But even if you're an identical twin, you're going to have what's called non-shared environment. You might have some friends who are different, right? You might take some classes that are different. You might do things that are a little different. Maybe one plays soccer, the other plays tennis. And so it's that non-shared environment that was key to who got happier and who got less happy or who didn't get happy. So it's a very interesting study with the twins that we did in the United Kingdom. We also are interested in going beyond self, of course. Most of our studies, we ask people, how happy are you? How often do you experience joy or tranquility, etc.? But we also are interested in measuring behavior. Are people actually acting differently when they're doing these interventions? And so we've done a bunch of studies where we've had people wear what's called a sociometric badge. So you know all of you have these sort of name tags. So imagine wearing, it's actually smaller than a name tag. It's like this, it's small. You wear kind of a badge around your neck, or you can wear it on your wrist like a watch. And this badge can measure your movement, kind of like now any phone pretty much can do it with its accelerometer. And also the badges, like if everyone in this conference were wearing these badges, it would be cool. And I could do a study. They send infrared signals to each other. So I could see who was talking to who, and who's more social, and who's less social, and how much are you moving. So we've done a bunch of studies with those badges. So, for example, we did a study at the Coca-Cola offices in Madrid, where we had people wear these badges, and we asked the question, can generosity propagate across a social network? And so our hypothesis was, so in this study we did, is some people were givers. So these are people at the company. We asked them to do nice things for their colleagues, to be the givers. And so we thought, when you're a giver, you're going to be happier because it's going to make you feel good, and you're going to do more acts of kindness. And then the receivers, they're the people who are getting the acts of kindness, and they're going to be inspired to help others because of what we call a pay-it-forward effect. Like if someone helps me, I'm going to be inspired to help someone else. And then the observers, or everyone else at the company, and they observe all these nice things that are happening, and so they're going to be inspired to also help others feel what's called an elevation effect. You feel elevated, inspired. And that's what we found essentially. I don't have the data here. Yeah, sorry. So that's what we found. Where we found that the givers got happier, the receivers got happier. I want to go back if I can. So going back to the Coca-Cola study, the receivers got happier right away. But the givers got happier and stayed happier for a longer period. And the observers and the receivers started doing more acts of kindness in the workplace. And we also know this from their badges that they were wearing. Okay, the last study I want to tell you about, we also use badges, and this study was done in Tokyo at a Japanese engineering firm, and this was actually kind of borrowing the Morty Sullivan idea, asking people every week to write down 3 good things, and this time we asked people to write down 3 good things that happened at work. And I always like to end my talks with a study because I think it's a really good intervention that all of you can use yourself or your clients. So every week, let's say on Friday, like today's Saturday, it's confusing. Like on Friday, every Friday, write down 3 good things that happened at work that week. And so that's the experimental group. And the control group wrote down 3 tasks that they accomplished that week, 3 things that you did at work that week. So they wrote down, what those things were, and they also wore these badges. And what we found was the people who wrote down 3 good things, they got happier. Yeah, I got the data here. They got happier, but also they moved more. Remember, they were wearing these badges, and they tracked their movement. And so what we found was the experimental group is in green. So look at actually the second graph. That's called initial rhythm. Initial rhythm is how energetic and active you are when you get to the office. Okay, you arrive to the office in the morning, and you see after the 6 weeks, the experimental group, they're the ones who are writing down 3 good things at work. They're actually moving more at the office. They're literally more active physically. So not only are they happier, but they're moving more. And then if you look at the first graph, this is the time, this is the peak hour that this is sort of the hour of the day that you're the most active. And the experimental group, we got earlier and earlier, 4 p.m. as opposed to like 5 p.m. And we also found that the experimental group, the group that wrote down 3 good things, they left the office earlier. They left work earlier. And so at first we thought, well, maybe that's a bad thing, because people are like playing hooky, they're leaving work early. But in these engineering, I don't know if you know, well, maybe you have some companies in Seoul, the average worker left at 11 p.m. 11 p.m. And we know this because they were in our study and they were wearing these badges, so we know exactly what time they left every day. So leaving work early maybe is a good thing, right? So instead of 11 p.m., maybe you're leaving at 9 or 10 p.m. So writing down 3 good things that happens to your work is an effective strategy to make you happier, more engaged at work, more connected to your colleagues, but also to actually give you more energy when you're at work. Okay, so I want to end by sort of repeating that I think happiness is a good thing, that most people in the world want to be happy, but it's not just about wanting to be happy. Happiness is not a selfish thing. People who are happy accrue or get a lot of good things in their lives. If you're happier, good things come to you. If you're happier, you're going to be more creative, you're going to find more friends, your health is going to be better, you're going to be a better leader and negotiator. But it's not easy to become happier. You can help other people, you can help your friends, your family, or your clients to become happier, but you have to do it one step at a time. You have to put a lot of work and effort and commitment into it. I always like to end with a quote from Aristotle, who 2,000 years ago wrote about happiness, and he wrote something that really encapsulates all the work that I do, which is that happiness depends upon ourselves. And before I leave, I have my email up here in case you have any questions. I'm very easy to reach, and my website. And I also have created a course that's free, and it's not really a course. It's more like you can do it in a few hours. It's like a little workshop where you learn about how to be happy, and I sort of talk and explain, and there's lots of sort of exercises, so you're also welcome